Matthew's here with the business news now. Markets have had a pretty turbulent time since the re-election of President Obama, haven't they?
Yes, markets worried about this so-called fiscal cliff, the package of tax rises and spending cuts that are going to come into effect in January unless a deal is done in Washington on trimming the deficit. The Wall Street main indices were all down over 2% on Wednesday. Forecasts that growth in the Eurozone is going to be pretty flat next year, also not helping sentiment. But here's the open in Europe. You can see things are moving upwards. Sharp declines on Wednesday, encouraging a bit of buying this Thursday morning. We can take a look at Asia as well, where markets have closed. They took their lead from Wall Street, all down. The Nikkei and the Shanghai both off about 1.5%.
Okay, the markets, of course, also still worried about Greece, but the Greek Parliament has taken an important step towards getting its next loan instalment
by passing the €13.5 billion austerity package, which it needs to do if it's going to get this €31.5 billion it badly needs. Let's take a look at the next steps on this, because there's another vote on Sunday in Parliament on the 2013 budget. That will be followed by a Eurozone finance minister meeting on Monday. There's then some parliamentary approval needed in a few European countries, but at the end of the month, this should be possible for this payment of €31.5 billion to be made. Now, measures contained in this austerity package include raising the retirement age up to 67 for some workers, also cutting pensions and public sector salaries by 5 to 35%, and also some increased costs on state healthcare. But the Greek Prime Minister made it clear in Parliament that for him these measures are essential.
Will we let ourselves default and return back into the arms of the drachma? This is what we're voting on. Are we going to stabilize Greece, its economy, its democracy, or are we going to let ourselves go into default, which will cause a social explosion?
Greek Prime Minister there. Turning to Asia, growth in China. Still robust, but it has slowed this year, hasn't it?
7.5% expected this year, Stuart. Now, that's way off the 10% or more that's been the average over the last 30 years. Well, the outgoing President Hu Jintao has been speaking this Thursday about the country's economic ambitions.
Fresh faces, growing powers. With the once-in-a-decade leadership change imminent, China's President Hu Jintao showed confidence the country's robust growth will continue. He promised economic reforms while setting an ambitious target.
We should double its 2010 GDP and per capita income for both urban and rural residents by 2020.
That will be a tough task for China's new leader. The Asian economic powerhouse has kept a two-digit average growth for 30 years, but is starting to see signs of a slowdown. This year's GDP rate is expected to slip to 7.5%.
The growth model that served China very well for the first 2 decades, in the third decade has become very, very strained and unsustainable. Unfortunately, it should have changed much earlier, and as a result, we've got a significant buildup of debt.
China heavily relies on exports. The country is feeling the pinch of the European debt crisis and economic weakness in the US. In July, overall exports grew by just 1%, the lowest since 2009. Sales to European countries fell 16.2%. Boosting domestic consumption could help China's economy, but it may lead to higher salaries, which could in turn affect the country's competitiveness. Beijing is also under pressure to ease its currency policy. Pegged to the US dollar until 2009, many still see the yuan as undervalued and giving unfair advantages to Chinese exporters.
Now, one new challenge for any Chinese leader is going to be an escalating row with Europe.
Who'd have thought that solar panels could be so contentious? Stuart, the saga is on Monday. China complained to the World Trade Organization that some European countries aren't playing fair when it comes to solar panels. They say Italy and Greece, for example, give subsidies to solar power plants that are using EU panels. Well, that penalizes Chinese producers. Well, this Thursday, the EU has opened its own probe into subsidies given to Chinese solar panel makers. I think this one is going going to run and
Tit
run.
for tat.
Yes, a little bit of that. Well, let's get some more of the day's company news. And authorities have searched the German offices of the European aerospace group EADS. It's part of a probe into alleged corruption at the company. The investigation is focused on the sale of Eurofighter jets to Austria. Well, this Thursday, EADS announced operating profits up 67% in the latest quarter to 537 million euros.
The French luxury group Hermès has upped its forecast for the year. The company reported sales of $850 million in the latest quarter. The maker of Birkin bags says it expects sales overall this year to rise 13%.
And France's Société Générale Bank reported profits down sharply. Net income was 85 million euros in the latest quarter. That was down 86% on the same period last year. The company blames losses on its holdings in Greece and the US.
Now, some bad news for Air France KLM. They carried fewer passengers in October.
Yep, they've reported this Thursday traffic down 2%, as you say, in the month of October. That's reflecting difficulties facing many airlines, particularly here in Europe, but not so for several airlines from the Middle East. Companies like Qatar Airways and the Abu Dhabi-based Etihad have been doing very well recently, but their emergence has not come without criticism.
Middle Eastern airlines are in high demand. Strong growth in September saw ticket sales up 13% year-on-year, when across the board, airline traffic grew globally by just 4%.
We have been doing extremely well in comparison to the previous years, in all aspects, in revenue, in number of passengers, yields, cargo.
Large fleet orders have also led to a 12% rise in capacity. They're now beating Europe, the Americas, Asia-Pacific and African airlines in passenger numbers. And while many Western airlines are trying to shrink their costs to cope with profitless growth, Emirates is investing.
There is no other wide-body airline having such big modern fleets than Emirates. We have a product where we invest more money than the others in food, in entertainment, and the customer is just voting with his feet.
But the so-called Emirates business model has drawn criticism from established carriers, including Air France. Critics say Emirates and other airlines in the region are expanding on the back of government fuel subsidies. Emirates is the world's largest buyers of A380s, with 90 on order, prompting critics to say the airline is overstretched, an accusation shrugged off by Emirates.
Now, Matthew's got news of a bank here in France getting some more state aid.
Yes, this is the struggling bank Dexia, which has already had some aid from the government. It's getting more state aid. The lender will get an extra 5.5 billion euros. Now, these funds will come from both the French and the Belgian governments. Dexia also released its results this Thursday, showing it made a net loss of 1.2 billion euros in the latest quarter.
And a new tax here in France has been nicknamed the Nutella tax.
Yes, perhaps a bit unfairly, but let me explain this. The French Senate is putting up taxes on products containing palm oil. Now, it's putting them up by 300%. Well, why is it the Nutella tax? Well, palm oil is an ingredient in the spread. In fact, it makes up about 15%. So this tax is aimed at encouraging producers to use less palm oil. But I can see you're not going to be discouraged, Stuart.
Oh, certainly my kids won't be. They love Nutella.
The tax, just you might be interested to know, the tax could add about 30 centimes to one of those big 5-kilogram pots that usually cost about 37 euros. So it's not going to be a huge,
not a huge amount. They're just trying
if you love it.
They're just trying to spread the cash around a bit.
Very good.
I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. Matthew, thank you very much. Matthew with the Business on France 24, the latest with Claire after the break.